Hello everyone, good morning, and welcome to the Career Pathway panel, which is about navigating the post-grad transition. My name is Maria, as Rachel did an amazing job of presenting me, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am a current MPA student. I'm excited to facilitate today's discussion with MPA alumni, and they'll share their experiences transitioning from grad school to the workforce. This is a great chance to hear from those who have been in our position, and we'll have time at the end for a Q&A session. Let's begin by having our panelists introduce themselves. Please share your name, your pronouns, graduation year, and current workplace position.
Thank you, Maria. My name is Iana. I use she, her pronouns. I graduated in 2024, and I worked at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory as a researcher.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is AJ Foltz, she, her pronouns, and I currently work at the Sound Cities Association, which is a small nonprofit in this area. I provide policy analysis to 38 cities and their elected officials in the areas of affordable housing, land use, and human services. I graduated in 2024 as well with a specialization in social policy and policy analysis.
Hi everyone, my name is Gus Wanich. I use he, him pronouns. I graduated class of 2024. I currently work as a regional continuous improvement coordinator for FEMA Region 10. I also have a quick disclaimer, if you don't mind. I'm speaking in my personal capacity, and my views don't represent DHS, FEMA, or the federal government. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Seto. I use she, her pronouns, and I graduated from Evans in 2022. I currently work for a committee in the Washington State Legislature called the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee. We basically do program evaluation for the state legislature. And also, all opinions today I express are mine and not the views of the organization that I work for.
Thank you for sharing. For the first question, in the post-grad transition, what were some of the largest challenges? And if possible, please consider outside of just finding a job. How was the transition emotionally, physically, financially, socially, etc.?
So I will say my experience was a bit different. I'm a Fulbright student, and so I had to start applying for jobs earlier than most of my classmates, and that meant that by April I had a job offer that I had to send to the Department of State. So it was difficult in the sense that there were a lot of people that didn't have a job right after graduation, and I was already diving in. The schedule was hard for me. I spent yawning the first 3 to 4 weeks, just the 8 to 5 kind of schedule that you're not used to for after 2 years of being in an MPA program. So that part physically was hard, and also just getting used to the different type of work that you are going to be doing. I would say also, speaking with my friends about this question in particular, they did ask me to say that interviewing is hard. It's a hard process, and you get a lot of rejections, and that is okay. It's a hard transition to go from like a program where you're probably doing great and people are constantly reassuring you that you're gonna do well, from doing your best in a job application and receiving a sad no at the end of it. It's part of the process, and it takes a toll on you, especially if you've interviewed or applied to like 10, 20, 30 jobs, which I know a lot of my friends did, I myself did as well. So wanted to emphasize that it's okay, and you'll get there eventually.
I agree with that. I'll say my job is a lot of government relations work, which was definitely sort of a transition from an academic space. I don't have as much experience in government relations, but I think it really like built upon my academic understanding of policy and policy analysis. And so it's kind of expanded my idea of like my future career and given me a lot of experience that's very valuable that adds to the work that I did in my MPA. But that was definitely a difficult transition, and I'm still not quite good at it yet, but we'll get there, and it takes time and growth. But I think if we're going to give some advice, it's definitely that you can look for things that don't necessarily directly align with what you expect, and that will always offer some place of growth for you, and expanding on what you did in school. I will also say that it's hard working from home. My mental health, definitely school gives you a reason to leave, your apartment or your home, and I don't leave as much for this job. Sometimes I do, sometimes I have meetings in other cities and things, but working from home all the time, definitely you have to find reasons to get out of the house. And so just sort of thinking about that as you kind of transition into a full-time workspace. And then I have one more thing, which was I definitely also had to shift my own expectations of the impact of my work. So, you're in school, you feel like you're doing a lot of really cool things. It's directly related to what you want to be doing because you choose it. And then when you get into, a full-time job, it's different because it doesn't quite align with necessarily what you were thinking that you wanted to be doing, or, but anyway, that all offers places of growth for you. And, your career is sort of a longer-term process than something that's a 2-year degree. So just take time and understand that, it takes a moment to get to where you want to be, and that's okay. You'll learn in any job that you have.
Yeah, I would say for me, transitioning into the federal government, I came from the private sector, and I was a part-time student while at Evans, so working full-time during the day and going to school at night. I thought it was a good balance, just being able to take what I was learning from work and then apply what I was learning to the classroom, talking with professors, talking with classmates. But starting the job and then just doing that, for your 40 hours a week was a little bit different because you didn't really have anyone to kind of riff off of or share your ideas with. It was mainly just like, here's what's happening at work, go home, get some sleep. So I think for me, I wanted to find that outlet to just share my ideas with. So I think that was a interesting transition because there weren't a lot of young people or people that came from grad school. It was mostly folks that have made a career out of emergency management. And coming from public policy, there are some intertwined connections and webs, but learning the jargon, learning the lingo of emergency management, I think that was a steep learning curve for me, but just being able to know and lean on my strengths and just build those connections, setting up those coffee chats with people on my team, I think really helped me set up for success.
I feel like everybody said I thought of a small amount of time I put into this. I'm so sorry. But I was working part-time at Evans, and then I immediately transitioned to full-time in that same position. And so basically, I went to graduation, I took the day off to graduate, and the next workday, I started working full-time, and that was not a very effective approach. I was used to working school hours plus my work hours, so I was working a lot. I couldn't really balance the whole work-life transition well. And so I was both physically and emotionally exhausted, and I didn't really know why. So I do recommend that if you do have a job right after graduating, making sure that you take time for yourself and take a break, at least a week, to kind of pull yourself together, because you just spent an entire year trying to graduate and working on your stuff, and that in itself is exhausting. So, and I asked a couple people who didn't have a job right after graduating how they felt, and they said that it felt a bit isolating for them. And one thing that, reflecting on now, would be that they wish they talked to other people about that experience, because a lot of people were going through it, nobody talked about it because everybody felt a little bit sad. And so I think being willing to be open and honest with your feelings would have, I think, helped a lot of them get through that.
I'll start on this side now. So the second question is, what parts of your degree with the Evans School have you been implementing the most in your career or your current work?
I work for the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Committee, so basically do program evaluation for the state legislature. And that perfectly aligns with Evan's curriculum. So if you're in your second year, you've probably taken the required program evaluation class. That is exactly what I do at JLARC. But other classes that I thought were particularly interesting, and so if you happen to be in your first year, you have more time to take classes. There was like a mixed methods study design course. I don't know if anybody's taken a class with Grant Bloom. He's a great professor. Yeah, and and he taught this class on mixed method study design and how to create research questions and scope your study in a way that is like both doable but also impactful. And I think that's the class that shockingly I draw the most on, because making sure that you have a strong baseline for the program evaluation that you do will set you up for success. So.
Yeah, I'd say for me it's also program evaluation. Also shout out Grant Bloom. He taught an advanced policy class where he talked about root cause analysis, and I've been thinking about that, and it's in my work every time there's a report or anything to do. I'd probably say like 80% of what I do is report writing. So whenever we have to identify a problem, it always comes down to the root cause analysis. So thinking about, all those frameworks, all those readings that we had to do, a lot of the time when you're in class, you kind of just like pass it through, it just goes over your head. But, there were days when I was working, I just like remembered what I learned on, and that really came in handy when it came down to presentations and stuff like that. I think another piece would also be community economic development. I took that with Joaquin. It doesn't necessarily apply directly to my work, but just in terms of being able to understand relationships and relationship building, I think is really key, because I feel like no matter where you are, just being able to rely on networks of people and coalition building can get you far.
I'll third the Grant Bloom statement. Exactly, a very transformative class for me. His advanced policy analysis class is amazing. But anyway, what I was going to actually say for this question is, I think you learn a lot of fundamentals, especially in your first year of core classes. And so what I draw on all the time is those sort of like base level policy analysis, program evaluation, like everything that you learn in your first year, budgets, understanding, finances, and government, things like that. All of that applies to my work. But then what that allows you to do is approach policy questions from any type of policy question that you have and that's in front of you. You can approach it with those same fundamentals in mind and then answer the question at hand. And so my work takes me through so many different regional issues in affordable housing and land use and all sorts of different human services areas that I didn't necessarily have direct experience with when I came out of grad school, but you can still answer those questions. And so I think that that's really important for me to draw on and will be useful and impactful for you all. That's really how my degree changed the way that I approach policy decision making. I'll also say, and I'll probably answer this again if someone asks about capstones, but your capstone is directly, very much a useful experience. It teaches you about professionalism, it teaches you about timely correspondence, and so that all really directly relates to things that you'll have to do, especially if your job is like mine, which is in government relations and sort of working with external partners. So that is also very directly relates to the work that I do at least.
So I will say I should have delved a bit more on what I do, but I do basically research all the time. So there's a lot of skills I won't, point to a particular class or a particular professor, although I echo Grant Bloom's class was amazing. But I will say, as a researcher, all the basics are useful for me, but also for interacting with the different sponsors of the projects that the lab gets. And so, for example, writing short, concise memos to just convey complex information in an accessible manner for different types of audiences, that has been key for me, and also the program evaluation techniques, specifically the qualitative methods that I learned in that class and in subsequent class has been key to the work that I do for the lab, the stakeholder mapping analysis, and just in general, like implementing and managing coalitions, networks, collaborations, groups of stakeholders for me has been key in all the research that I do and how I communicate that research. For example, like classes such as communicating climate change has been key to be able to say, this is a better way to communicate these findings, these results to this audience or this other audience. More like lead reviews, literature reviews that are so tedious have been fundamental to be able to have a foundation in all the projects that I do research on. And just as AJ was saying, just addressing complex problems in general. So you have such good foundations from the Evans curricula that it's so good to finally see it being applied to your work and people highlight those skills at your work. And so I think that's something that really differentiates this program from others, is just how you approach a complex problem, right? The famous like universal goals, how do you achieve them? That kind of mentality and thinking is something that I think is key, that you get from the Evans curricula. And also the capstone, just as an example of like how you can do a thorough research or project from start to finish in this like very limited timeline, engaging with different stakeholders, not always things going the way you want, but being able to be flexible and adapt to the needs of the client has been key for me to be able to navigate many of the different projects that I'm on.
Thank you. As a first year, I'm very excited on the capstone, so thank you so much for sharing that. For our third question, what were some specific tangible steps you took in your job search process, and what was most helpful?
I have a lot of notes here, so I'm gonna try to be concise, but the first one is just the classes in itself. I worked for PNNL because I looked at a report from them in my climate change policy class with Matt Stewart, and I was so intrigued by the work that they were doing that I looked them up, first in LinkedIn, then in their own page, and found that they were hiring for some jobs that I would be fit for. And so that's one. Like if you see a report, an article, anything that you like, look for the author and look for the institution they work on and look for whether they have job openings. I also talked, for example, with Matt Stewart about my interests and the skills I wanted to put into practice and where he thought I could use them, and he recommended the national laboratories as a place to start. So that was good. If there's a professor you have a good relationship with, have a conversation about what could be a good place that you could put into practice those skills or those interests that you have. As I mentioned, use LinkedIn, but don't stay there. Just go to the pages of like the different organizations and institutions that you're interested in. I also tailored my resume a lot and had people who knew me and my career look at that and look at cover letters that I wrote. And that was key because they were able to point things out that maybe I was missing or that I wasn't emphasizing enough that would be relevant for the job. Also, don't be afraid to network, especially for international students. This is not something that I do in my country a lot, to just reach out through a LinkedIn message. And that has really been a game changer for me. And have a template for everything so that process is more seamless. So have a LinkedIn template message, have a email template, a thank you note, coffee chat questions, just whatever that makes that process of reaching out to new people easier for you. And also try that, this is my last one, I swear, try to look at the bigger picture. I got a job at the Evans School as a researcher on a topic I had never, ever looked at that, which was the Washington State Paid Family and Medical Leave. And that job is the reason I have the job I have today. So just don't look exactly, and AJ was touching on this earlier, don't look exactly at what you want to do, but try to look more at what interests, what skills are going to drive that position that could be useful for you in the future.
Deanna's last point was my first point, which is looking at varying roles and making sure that you apply sort of more widely past your interests. You don't ever know how a job is going to, help you in your career and make you a more well-rounded applicant for future jobs. I'll also say, this was mentioned earlier, but don't get discouraged when you get rejected. It happens and it's going to be difficult, and this is not an easy process. So just realize that and take it in stride and just say like, okay, gotta move forward now. Time to apply for another job or time to prepare for this next interview. And that will serve you, I think, better than if you get caught up on something or if you get caught up really wanting a job, because I cried many times after not getting jobs. And it's just not worth your time. And I like where I ended up, so it's okay. I'll also say, I also have a list for this question. Make a list of organizations that you want to work at, anywhere sort of along those lines, and monitor those job pages directly. Evans Jobs does a great job of compiling things, but always look directly at their websites, because you never know, and sometimes things get missed or it doesn't show up on LinkedIn. Just go to those pages. Also, you should absolutely organize it on something like Excel. Don't try and keep it all in your head. You can put links in there, do the due dates and the materials that you need to submit the application, any questions. Just put it all in one place so that you're aware of kind of everything in one spot. You can organize it by date. That really helps me as a very type A person when it comes to my career. And finally, I'll say, be upfront in your interviews about your abilities and qualifications, and don't be shy about it. I think I got this job that I have now because they asked me, is there anything else you want to know? And I said, I produce very high quality work, and it's shown, and in reviews that I get from supervisors, it's shown in the work that I do for school, and I think that helped me in the long run, just being very upfront about how this degree has really helped me move forward throughout my career. So that is my top piece of advice, I think. Just be upfront about what you do and how high quality your work is out of this degree. So.
Yeah, I would say for me, a lot of the steps came pre-interview, pre-application. I like to think ahead a lot of the time, so I like to create a vision board of similar with what they were saying, what orgs I want to work with, what values I currently align with, do they align with my values? So putting the preparation into that made the process a lot more easier for me when it came down to actually applying. Another resource that I used was the career development office here. Just being able to set up a one-on-one with the staff to understand what your strengths are, what type of work you would want to be doing, what kind of impacts you would want out of the work, really helped me, because I felt like I was super lost in the application process. It was just another PDF, it was just another number, and it started to get really draining. But taking the time for that careful and slow reflection really helped to kind of just balance it out and figure out hey, here's where I succeed in, here's where I can improve in, and just being able to understand those types of things really helped me understand who I was as a whole person. So I would say that would be my advice, just pre-interview, pre-application, know who you truly are, and if something doesn't stick, that's okay, because every rejection is a redirection, and hopefully we'll get to a better place.
I will not have anything so inspirational. But it will be, I think, it was particularly useful. So I moved from the job that I was working part-time, and then I moved into that job full-time, and I started as a summer intern, and the person who actually hired me as a summer intern, I did not realize when I invited him here is the person who hired me. I started looking in the December of 2020, which was kind of peak COVID, and so very much lockdown. And I started looking for a job that early, like 6 months before an internship would start, because I wasn't sure what the job market would look like. I didn't know if people were hiring full-time positions, let alone like they had the capacity to hire an intern on top of that. So I think especially in this time, starting earlier doesn't hurt. And especially if you're looking at somewhere like Evans Jobs, they're particularly focused on hiring people who are graduating, so they understand your timeline, which I think if you're looking on somewhere else, they may not. And then the other thing I will say is I moved from being an intern to part-time to full-time because I asked. And I think that that is really important. They may not be hiring a full-time position when you're an intern, but by asking, it lets them know that you're interested, and so when there is a space open for you, they know that you want it. So,
Well, thank you for sharing such insightful responses. We'd now like to open the floor for questions. If you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to raise your hand, and then we'll give you the microphone.
Hey, thank you for being here, panelists. Pretend like I don't know most of you. I feel like every graduating class feels like they are like facing difficulty looking for jobs. I felt that way in 2024, but I feel like classes of 2025 and 2026 are facing very precisely unique challenges. It comes to like governance that espouses, values that are not similar to the Evans School, or we have like budget shortfalls on basically all levels of government in Washington. What are some kind of like what's some specific advice you can offer people who are graduating this year and next year in this kind of challenging time?
No. I can start. Thank you, Josh. I appreciate that question and calling out the elephant in the room, and it's true. This is very difficult. One thing I'll say is I work with a lot of different political ideologies. The entire King County area spans, from very left to very right. It's just kind of the nature of the work that I do, and I think something to remember though is like the politics of the nation is not the politics of this region, and like this region is very committed to doing a lot of good work. And so if you're planning on staying here, like I see every day, despite political ideology, that everyone wants to continue these services that they're providing. I work for all these local governments who really like see truly the value of their work, and it is directly impacting the community that they work for. And I think that it's shown me that like, despite all of this and all the threats that we're facing as public service workers, this work will continue, and public servants will always be needed at every level of government. And so I think that's sort of my general thought about the time that we're in. It's very difficult to sort of give advice when you know that jobs might not exist or funding gets cut and those things, like that's very difficult. But this work continues all the time. So there will always be opportunities. I'm going to put a plug in for local governments that you should look and apply to local governments around this area, because they continue to do this work and people are always needed. And so my boss would be so proud of me for throwing in my pitch, but I really wanted to, because I work with all of these mayors and council members and people, and they all really want to continue this work despite. So there's some preparation for potential uncertainties, but really it continues until there is a direct threat. So I think it's just very important to recognize that, and sort of it's my point of optimism during this difficult era. Yeah.
So the first thing I would say is that definitely go local. I echo all of what AJ said. I think the work at the community level is so important, and that's not gonna stop happening. So just if you don't wanna go federal because of like all of what's happening, just go to the state, county, city level and work for your community. think that's also more rewarding right now than any other job. I also think, and I've heard from like friends that are working at the state or city level, that the philanthropy sector is starting to rise a lot as this like substitute or alternative to federal funding. So I would also look at philanthropic organizations as an option for continuing to work on valuable and impactful work, and that could align more with the Evans values. And this is my pitch from the national laboratories of the Department of Energy, but energy needs aren't going anywhere. I swear, like the need for transmission for energy in this country is about to double in the next 10 years. And it might not seem like people want to hear about clean sources of energy, but we are not able to comply with that load growth only with fossil fuels. So I'm talking utilities, I'm talking, like this type of work might seem boring, but the next few years are gonna be very exciting for the energy sector. DOE is having a lot of restructure and like changes, but at the, on the ground, this doesn't matter. In the end, we need to comply with the energy needs. We need to provide, the US with energy, and that's gonna come from, yes, fossil fuels, but also from nuclear, from wind, from solar, from offshore wind. So if that's an area you're interested on, I would encourage you to look further into that, because those jobs are gonna grow for sure.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm just trying to think of what April 2024 Jess would want to hear from 2025 Jess. So I would just say focus on building soft skills and just building those relationships. Because you're here at Evans for a reason. Like they're teaching you these hard skills that once you're out, like you already got that down pat. But a lot of the times, like we're not really taught about how to talk to people at different levels, whether it's an executive down to your neighbor. So just being able to understand how you can communicate effectively with people, but not compromise on like who you are, I think that's truly important, because wherever you go, you're going to be working and managing and talking to a lot of different people. And there's going to be a lot of difficult conversations that you're going to have. There's going to be a lot of enlightening conversations that you have. But if the work that you're doing impacts who you are and your values, then that's something to keep in mind. Just who you are at the end of the day, what skills and strengths that you bring, understanding the soft skills like communication, leadership, teamwork. I feel like those are things that are kind of glossed on when it comes to like curriculums, but those are super important when it comes to any job that you do, because you might be doing a job as an individual contributor, and you might be doing a job on like a 10 to 20 person team. But understanding how you play your own role, how you contribute to the rest of the group in a larger scale is really important. And I think just understanding, who you are and what goals you want for the end of the day, focusing on what you can control. Because I feel like a lot of times, people say, oh, you're gonna graduate in these tough economic or challenging times, right? And it's kind of tiring to hear that over and over again. But something that I've been keeping in mind is that, the names may change, but like the streets stay the same, right? Because if you focus on, your own processes, how you are as a person, how you build those habits, once you get into that job or an opportunity that you're going to be in, it's just going to be a breeze, and you're going to be able to rely on people since you've built that time building those relationships. So I think that would be my piece of advice.
I think, so I work for the state, and I do nonpartisan research, which means that we work with both Republicans and Democrats with the House and the Senate. And the one thing that when I applied to JLR was I looked at its mission, and its mission is, I think it's the I knew the mission this morning when I read it. It's help state government be more effective, efficient, and accountable. And I think that when you're looking and applying for jobs, the people leading the organizations may change, but at least at the state and local levels, those missions are, that those missions aren't going to change. And so maybe looking there.
Are there any classes you wish you had taken or opportunities you wish you had taken advantage of while you were at Evans that you recommend?
Can I ask a little bit about you? Would you mind? Are you first year or second year? Like, where are you in your Evans career?
I am like at the end.
Oh, no.
But like just I've been part-time, so I've been kind of able to take what I can take in the evenings, and so it's been hard to take advantage of all the opportunities. So if there's anything that you think would have been
I will, okay.
Good.
Yeah. Yes, I can answer this question. Or I will try to. I will put in a plug. I don't know if Grant Bloom still does it, but the mixed methods study design class, if you can't take it and it's around, you should take it. It was my favorite class. Classes I wish that I had taken, I wish I had taken way more accounting courses. Taylor does a lot of looking at like state budgets and agency budgets, and I think that probably would be useful. I am now happy to learn that. So.
Yeah, I would say for me, any class that can help you build a portfolio would be helpful, because that just shows like, hey, you did 3 years of grad school. Here's what I did. And I think that really comes in handy because you're gonna have your resume, you're gonna have your own self, and that can get you far. But once you have that portfolio of work to show, like, here's where I really put my skills, I think that can really shine. So I'm not sure what the class names are, but I think anything in terms of like data viz or GIS, any communications classes where you build memos or reports. The capstone is going to come in clutch too if you build a report with your team showing that you work well with others and that you have this really nice final product that you deliver to stakeholders. Just being able to build off of those to show that you're a capable person, hardworking, and you have the skills to back that up.
I'll just second the finance and budgeting courses. If you can take one that's above the level of the core class, that might be useful, especially if you're like me and you are going to work for something local, like local government. Just because it's sort of everything falls back onto that, and especially right now with state budget deficits and things that are happening sort of at the local level, who also are struggling with revenue. I think that would be very helpful, and something that I wish I had a bit more background on as I try to answer questions for elected officials. Yeah.
I would say very mindful of the classes I was taking, so I don't have like any regrets about the ones I took. I will second the portfolio piece because I submitted one of my memos, like literally the final memo from the first policy class, I think. In that case, it was taught by Ben Branges. And that memo was the one that got me the interviews at both the national labs that I ended up having an offer from. So just being able to do a good job with the deliverables, don't think of them as like this thing you have to do to pass this class, but think of them like as an investment for future job applications. And I hate myself for saying this, but cost-benefit analysis has been a great work, and I was very sad the whole time I took it, but now I'm very grateful with the past.
So you've had to submit memos as a part of like the application?
Just because it was, she asked if I had to submit memos to every job application. No, this was because the national labs are research focused, so they were trying to see like my writing skills and like my capacity of summarizing and like that kind of skill. So in that case, yes, I had to submit both to PNNL and NREL, which is the National Renewable Energy Laboratory.
You would want to have a writing sample of some kind, just so that you have it in case they ask for it. I've also been asked not this job search, but in previous job searches to do research and create a memo for them. It was sort of at like a later period in the hiring process, but just be prepared that might be a question that they would ask. I don't know who does that around here. Didn't have to, but I've had to before. So, but definitely have a writing sample, something that is concise, a memo, you know, anything that you got a good grade on, so.
Thank you.
So I've talked to a lot of like state level employers for state agencies. So at least in Oregon, where I've mostly been applying, I've heard a lot very consistently that they've gotten a big influx of former federal employees who have recently been laid off. So given that type of competition in applications, do you have any recommendations for how to stand out against people that maybe have more experience in this like specific job area of employment or?
Okay, I can. Thankfully, I prepared an answer for this question. So, okay, what I'll say, first of all, everyone needs a job, and it's unfortunate. And so, I see it less about standing out, whereas you just have to adjust to the changes in the job market. Their qualifications and their abilities and their experience does not take away from your qualifications and your abilities and your experience. So just keep that in mind. You are a qualified individual who has a master's degree. So if you just remember to like focus on your high quality, you know, the work that you produce, and unfortunately, it will change the job market significantly, and that's just part of how we're going to have to adjust during these hopefully just few years of this sort of happening. But, you know, it doesn't change you. You just have to continue. It shouldn't change anything about how you apply. Just make sure that you are being very intentional about your applications and being very forward about your abilities in your interviews. Just be honest with them. Tell them the truth and tell them that you're a qualified individual.
I will just say, take advantage of those positions that are like postgraduate, XNX, or like fellowship, or like internship, because those things might have not been, you know, like of interest a few months ago, but as AJ is saying, like the job market has changed and we have to start looking for stuff that will allow us to grow into bigger positions later on. For example, like the position I am at is a postmaster's research associate at the Pacific Northwest National Lab, and if it weren't because of my Fulbright like requirements, I would have been able to step into a full-time researcher position for who knows how long. And that was just me applying to like what seemed initially like a 1 to 3 year position, right? So things happen, things change as you get more comfortable into the role, as you're able to excel in those type of roles. So just the general advice would be to not look away from those positions that look like minor, but they're not. They're just a possibility for you to grow into that job later on.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, if anyone has it.
Okay, so at lunch, we're going to participate in a networking lunch. So, what is your advice for people in networking conversations? If a student were to come up to you, what are you expecting? What advice would you give someone?
I did a lot of networking in undergrad. I spent some time in DC, and so I have a lot of experience. I don't have a lot of experience being on the side of the employer, potential employer. But what I will say is the things that were more successful to me is just making an interpersonal connection. Like it doesn't have to be always about the jobs that you want and like what you're trying to do, and that sounds really like eager and forward. And so just kind of like be like, it's a conversation. You don't have to be intimidated by people just because they're, in a job that you might want or are hiring for something. Don't don't let that discourage you from like having a conversation. And in that conversation, you can talk about, who you are, your qualifications, your experience, and like how this degree has really helped you. And that all translates into, okay, this is a person, I see a human being. And then when you apply for jobs, your name is remembered because you had a conversation and you made that personal connection. So it's not just about the jobs and the things, and that's so forward. And what has worked for me is just like coming from a place of being really kind and being open and approachable, which I will do for all of you if you come talk to me. Just being like very kind and approachable and saying like, oh, hello, what's your name? And like things like that. So don't be intimidated by these conversations. That doesn't serve you, so.
Yeah, I would say for me, the word networking is just very annoying to me, but when it comes down to what AJ was saying about having those conversations, again, knowing your audience. So a way that I like to kind of like break it up in my head is, if you're talking to someone that's, let's say, 0 to 5 years in their career, kind of around the same age or experience of what you have. A question that I like to think about, like in my head, is like, okay, if I were friends with this person, how would I want to spend my time with them? And not necessarily just like in a hobby kind of way, but just like, what would I want to learn from them? What was helpful in their role starting out? If you're talking to someone that's like 10 to 15 years in, they probably had a lot of career transitions, they're probably starting a family, a lot of big life things going on. So understanding, how they got to their journey and what is something that they shared with you that you want to have in your life. I mean, that may sound kind of weird, but just like, if they are an executive somewhere or they're executive director of a nonprofit, what are some steps that they took, post grad school or in their life to get them to where they are. And if you're talking to someone that's like 20 years of experience, they've done all of the things, just understanding like, they've had that long gap between where you are and where they are. So I think it's really key to like ask them about like their life experience, but kind of like shorten it down. So telling them like, hey, like if you were my age, what is advice you give to me? And I think just being able to break that down really helps with the networking piece. Because again, it comes down to conversation, and if you're able to relate to people on those different levels, then I think you're set up for success.
As somebody who detests networking, and would rather run a marathon than do it, I tend not to do it very often, so I will preface it by saying that. But one thing that has really helped me is realizing that it's a two-way street. They are assessing you, but you should also be assessing them. You want to know if you want to work there, you want to know if you want them to be your manager. And I think remembering that, I think, kind of gives you back a little bit of power, and you can then approach it much more fully as a human, is what I would recommend. And as you can see, come up and talk to me. I don't like networking, so you can just talk to me like a normal person.
So thank you to our panelists for sharing your time, your experiences, and your insights with us today. And your experience offers a valuable perspective, especially for students who are now in this transition period. And also thank you to our audience for being here and for everyone who also organized this event. If you're interested in continue this conversation with our panelists, some of them will be around today, either outside this room or during lunch or networking events. So be sure to just, like they said, just come up and be friendly and keep the conversation going. Thank you.